So when people have an problem with internet addiction or just with internet use in general, they often come to places like Reddit, NoSurf, and they want to learn about how to curb their bad habits. And one of the advices the recommendations you often see is to use blocking programs or blocking apps if we're talking about mobile. But the people who are asking for advice, they may read these recommendations, and they might ask, like, how does this actually work in practice? Like, you're recommending me a program, and dot, like, that's just the phrase. You're just recommending me a program, and that's it. But I think to truly understand the function of these programs, is you have to think a little broader. So I don't think that usually happens in these comments, even though there are people who explain it very well. But in this video, I want to give you some like a practical example of why these blocking programs are so useful. So the problem of the internet, especially the modern internet with TikTok and Instagram and all this, like you're constantly being mentally engaged by things that are not important. So you're spending like your mental energy, like the wavelength, so to say, you're spending it on things that are useless, pretty much. The news, like reading the news, like you might be at your work, you might be, or you may be a student and you have to write an essay, and you're constantly distracted by news sites. You're like pressing F5, so you're refreshing the screen to see if there's anything new, or you simply return to the same news site every 5 minutes or every 10 minutes. But you're stuck in habits that don't make you happy. And a lot of people don't understand how this works, but the problem is you're getting constantly stimulated. Like your brain is getting constantly stimulated um, by a lot of information that is not important. But pretty much like it becomes impossible to feel bored. And it sounds like a good thing, right? Like nobody wants to be bored, but actually I want to be bored because once I get the feeling of boredom, I also get a feeling like my mind starts to be creative and starts to think like, what can I do with all this time, and how can I be productive with this time? So when you are essentially when you are blocking the internet, which is an endless source of information, then life suddenly becomes boring, like it used to be for let's say maybe your like yeah your parents, your grandparents. um, so then suddenly you start having a lot of time, and that's the great thing about realizing what the internet does with you. And when you cut that behavior, then suddenly you have a lot of time. Actually, personally, I have so many things I want to do that I still feel like I have little time. But if you compare it to how you were living and how I was living before discovering what like internet truly does with you, you can start living like a digitally minimalist life. So you just use the internet for useful things, and you just leave the rest. And then what you get is that you have a lot of time for things that are hard to do when you're constantly on the internet. Because let's face it, it's much easier for you to stay on the internet and just read about crap or watch porn or watch fancy music videos that are like constantly keeping your brain like you may not realize, but you're like hooked on these. Uh, yeah, I'm not sure what the right word is, but you're constantly being stimulated, and I know for a fact that a lot of people, when they ask themselves, what do I really want to do with my life? Well, one of the things they often mention is playing an instrument. When you might want to learn how to play an instrument, like so many others, but it doesn't happen. And in part, it has to do with just our lack of concentration and weakness, and our inability to do hard things. And the problem, it might not actually be hard to play the piano, but it's harder compared to just looking at your internet all day and being constantly like having your attention constantly disrupted, low, so fragmented in all these small habits on the internet. So like you cannot concentrate on something like this anymore. Now, once you actually don't have this internet access all the time, or you just block it temporarily with an app, you'll see that it's much easier to do things like this, and it will be much more fun than it would be otherwise. And then you kind of discover that it's not as hard as you seem. So, like many of you, I always wanted to do something like play an instrument, but I had no music education in school because they couldn't find a teacher. I couldn't even read like the easiest, I knew zero. Uh, I knew absolutely nothing about music. Um, but then when I started with self improvement, one of the things I really wanted to do is play piano. So I had an instrument before, another instrument, but I could never get myself to practice consistently. And what I do to make this easier for myself is, for example, I always have like every evening I have at least an hour when I don't have any access to the internet, and I just do a lot of different things that either need to be done or something like this, which becomes much easier if you don't have this pressure of the internet. And I've been doing this for years now, so I can always also play piano when I have access to the internet. But the point is, like, with these blocking apps, you can either like create a regular schedule when you don't want to have access to the internet, or you can temporarily block it whenever you want, and then say, okay, right now I just want to focus. I want to do something hard, and it can be playing the piano. So it's interesting. So I have two pieces that are relatively like technical, so they're relatively like boring to play, but I can do this. Um, so then you do the same with the left hand, or this, like the other piece on the other page is like this. Even though this might be a bit little monotonous sometimes, playing an instrument, learning, practicing things may be a bit monotonous, or you may have to repeat a lot of things to like the hard parts of your piece. You need to repeat it a lot of times. But actually, when I'm like in this zone of there's nothing else to do but like playing something in the piano, it becomes super fun. Like even the relatively boring stuff becomes super fun. Then what it ultimately looks like is more something like this. So let's see. Uh, so that already sounds a lot more fun, like than just doing this. What was on the other page, like page like this. But it will ultimately become music, and it's hard to learn something as an adult. Like you got to put in the work, but it just like, my message is it just becomes so much easier when you have the concentration for it, just like we had in previous generations. So stop spending so much time on screens and start truly living.